Hello and welcome to the fourth and final in a series of short webinars on SketchUp for landscape and garden design. Today we're going to be looking at the use of extensions or plugins as they're sometimes called. Just to remind you, if you haven't been watching this series, the first part concerns setting up SketchUp and the use of the simple background features so that you're creating a template, and that was applied both to SketchUp, and then we explored and made some settings in layout. It really helps so that you're not fiddling around and wondering why you're getting inconsistent style across your drawing sets. And you can put quite a lot of some time-saving functions into SketchUp before it starts, so that you're not having to create the same list of tags and bring in kind of objects that you use all the time. You can embed them into an empty session of SketchUp, and that's what we were sort of looking at on day one. The second session was concerned with building a model that was geared towards presentation, and we've made the distinction between presentation and detail, which was day 3, simply because there's a slightly different modeling technique, and you really want to get to presentation as quickly as possible so that you can then devote time that the client's approving and focus more on how you make that design work and start to make some considerations towards the construction detailing. And obviously today is the final part. Thank you very much if you've joined me so far. And if this is your first time listening, then I hope that you will go back and consider exploring the other sessions. Now, I'm going to go straight over to SketchUp. Just move my window around a little. Now, plugins or extensions are fundamental to the way SketchUp works. Out of the box, the native functions within SketchUp are very useful and will get you a long way, and they will form the majority of your daily modeling practice. But frequently you'll want to do something that the geometry or the mathematics in SketchUp won't allow, or it gives you a result that is slightly different to the one that you expect. Sometimes you want to do things and it's just beyond you, or it's tedious and time consuming, building a set of steps, for instance, building a roof, building a fence line, a road. All of these are functions that have been automated, and you can simply input from a series of variables, and the plugins will take over and construct your geometry. At the other extreme, we have little plugins or extensions that allow us just to enhance something that's already in SketchUp. And there's everything in between. SketchUp has its own embedded library of these extensions, and it's called the Extension Warehouse. But there is a second website which is external to SketchUp, and this is held at the website sketchupation.com. And I will go and show you both of those to give you an overview. So the first website I'm going to show you is the Sketchupation website. And whoops, that's not it. So bear with me. I think I've got it closed down, so let me just open that up. Okay, here we go. Right, better. Okay, this is my web browser. So this is very simple to access. Go to the Sketchupation. At the top is this welcome banner, and it's this big red box, and you sign up. So you have to register to use the website, It's free, and it's held under the resources, the plugin store download. And that puts a little application into SketchUp, and from that application, you can then access the plugins. And if I remember, I will, I've got it installed, so I will try and activate it. So I'm just going to come out of that, and we're going to go back into SketchUp. Now, within SketchUp, I mentioned that we have the 3D warehouse, and that is activated from the large tool set down on the bottom, and there are 4 icons, and there's a little box with a ruby in it. Excuse me. So I'm just going to select that, and it's asking me to sign in, so bear with me. In fact, I'll look at that later, because I've realized I'm in SketchUp 2019 for this part of the demo, simply because I've got all of these plugins still active in 2019, and I haven't moved them over to 2020 just yet. So I will look at that shortly when I'm in 2020. Okay, so I'm hopefully going to get through about 14 or 15 plugins. Some of them are very quick, some of them are a little bit more involved. This is really a teaser, because I can't go into all the plugins that I use, because I probably have 40 or 50 installed. A bit like your phone, you've got stuff which you only use very occasionally. But I have sorted them out, and I really can't reduce them anymore, because the ones I've got I do find useful. Some of them would take a long time to explain. They're quite involved and really allow you to start working on new modeling techniques. Let's see, things like Sub-D and Quad Face and Vertex tools by TomTom are paid applications, but they really change the way SketchUp works, and you can start moving and curving surfaces. There are other plugins which take you out into external programs. So they're installed by the additional program. So they could be things like Enscape or Twinmotion, and they allow you to do real-time rendering. But I'm going to show you a variety. Don't be afraid of them. It's worth experimenting. If you don't like them, you can always uninstall them. Plugins are mostly free, but some of them you pay for. Some of them can be very expensive, and even more expensive than SketchUp itself. But you're usually told, in fact, you're always told before you install something whether it's going to cost. Right, the first one I'm going to show you is a little plugin that I find useful when creating diagrams or things that I have to explain to other people through a drawing. And also if I'm using lots of geometry that needs aligning. And an example here is I've got some pins, and they need to be assembled or indicate that they're being assembled into some countersunk holes. And I might have used guides to help set me up. So I've got some construction geometry here, but I'm going to have to get rid of these at some point because they're going to get in the way of my drawings. So I'm going to be left with a cylinder and a hole, and I might struggle to align them. So during the creation process, I would use the infinitely long guides, and I would just draw a short line over them, and probably the same for the holes. So I'm just simply snapping onto the existing guideline, and then at some point I would decide to delete it. So I'm left with these little legs of geometry. And most of the time they're going to be a little unobtrusive, but if I take these through into layout, they will come with the object. A neat little plugin allows me to select these pieces of geometry and convert them into construction lines. And it's been around a long time, and I found it very useful, especially as guides get switched off when you take drawings into SketchUp. Sorry, into layout. It also means that I can take this geometry and I can then very quickly snap to other guide points for assembly or indicating that something is aligned. Oops. And then I can just slide it into position. So I know in 2020, you can assign elements of geometry to their own tag, and then that tag can be given an attribute. So everything could be switched over to center line or dotted line, for instance. So that is a little bit cumbersome, I think, and it doesn't give me specific control over geometry. So I still use it, and it is useful. It's free, and that's from the SketchUp warehouse. Now I'm going to come over to this large curved line, and there is a really useful set of plugins, and they've been bundled together, and it's this very large tool set, and it's called the Jhs Power Bar. I don't think it's on the warehouse. It's certainly in the Sketchupation library. It's free, and it's more of a best of collection of other people's extensions. So there are, however many there are in here, 18, 20, and they range in all the things they do. There seems to be no logic as to why they're collected together, except they can be extremely useful. I'm not going to go into all of them, and I don't use all of them, but I use enough of them to keep the whole set together. Now, you can find a lot of resources about these extensions, both from the people who wrote them. So they have a little homepage each in both of the libraries, but probably a better source of information is YouTube. And excuse me, there are probably 3 very good resources, at least to get you going. You will find your own and have your own preferences for the people that you decide to listen to. But a really good starting point is the SketchUp channel. And the host there, Aaron, produces a large number of broadcasts, and they range from about 2 hours for live modeling sessions, which are more about problem solving, all the way through to really short, couple of second, simple skill builders. And he's recently started looking at extensions. And recently, he went through the entire Jhs Power Bar. So he spent a few minutes on every single one of these. So that would be a good place by way of introduction. A second place on the YouTube channels is the Sketchup Essentials site. And that's run by Justin Geis. And he likewise focuses on extensions and ways of using them. And he goes into quite a lot of depth, and some of his videos are 15, 20 minutes long. He does a lot of broadcasts, several a week, sometimes one a day. So it can be quite difficult to track down the one that you're interested in, but go into the archives for each of these channels and just skim through and pick out the ones that you think you're interested in. And finally, a little different, but there's a channel called Tutorials Up. I'll put links to these in the comments for the YouTube videos, but Tutorials Up is slightly different. There isn't a voiceover. You just get a little bit of background music, and that's almost exclusively extensions. And the broadcaster will, I don't know his name, but takes an extension and then uses kind of the extension in lots of different ways. So he's really exploring the possibilities. There is usually not much related to gardens or landscape, but you have to figure out that what they're doing might be applicable to you. So those are some of the best resources to get going with. So back to Jhs Power Bar. I'm going to pick these 2 curves, and I'm going to select this one in the middle, and it is Extrude Line. An extrude line is, it does what it says. It drags a line into 3 dimensions. And that can be useful for all sorts of things, except I can't really recall how I use it, but I use it all the time. I use it probably for cutting, so I can create a plane and I can use the plane to cut through other geometry very quickly. But usually it's probably about projecting. I can project geometry and bridge between other planes or create bounding elements. But it's one of those things that you use very quickly, 2 or 3 times in a project. But it's background creation geometry. So that can be really useful. It certainly saves having to build 3-dimensional shapes and then delete off all of the faces that you're not interested in. Now, here is a little bit of a garden-related plugin. So we have a plant that's been brought in from the warehouse. And what I want to do is plant up part of this area. I'm not going to do all of it, but I'm going to plant up with this plant over here. And I could just do cut and paste. And if you've done this several times, then you will know it can be quite painful. You think that you've got the plants onto a surface and then you rotate your model and it's off in space somewhere. And then it's quite difficult you think that you're spacing them randomly, but then you realize you've got whole patches that you've missed. So a much better way is to do it by proxy, which means you do it by making a tool do it for you. And on the power bar, towards the right-hand side, I've got some little crosses, and this is the creation of center points or control points. So I'm going to click and simply click and place a series of random points. And as I'm clicking, they're staying blue, so they're staying selected. So that'll do. And then I'm going to pick my plant. Now, because I brought this in from the warehouse, it is already a component. I've now got my point selected and I've got my plant selected. And it doesn't need to be a plant, it could be anything else. Right at the end is an icon which places components at control points. So if I click that, what has happened is it's taken that component and then put one at the center of those points. So now I've got my plants all bundled up together. And it looks quite random, but it's really just made a series of copies. So each of these plants is in the same orientation and at the same scale. So I'm going to select all of them. I think I've got all of them. Now, coming back along the power bar, there is a little cluster of icons in the center, well, sorry, more towards the center. And there are 3 of them. And the first one is randomly scale the selected component. One is randomly rotate the selected component. And the third one is randomly scale and rotate the selected component. So I've selected my components, and if I hit this one, it causes them all to rotate and become resized. So hopefully you can see that they're all now different sizes, and it looks a little bit more natural. Obviously, I've got a massive polygon count going on here. So if I'd done that on my model, I would have selected all of these plants and put them away onto their own tag. So I'm just going to undo that just to reduce my geometry. Okay, we'll come back to the power bar. I think I've got, here we go, another tool set here. There is another large tool set, and this one's called 1001 bit. So 1001 bit, and it's freeware. So it's from the extension warehouse. And the download, the little section about it on the warehouse explains that it's not compatible with 2020, which is why I'm showing this in 2019. But I do run it in 2020, and I've only just recently installed it. But just to make sure that it works, then I'm running it in 2019. But so far, it's behaved itself. So sometimes you come across plugins that claim that they don't work or have not been updated to suit the latest release, but you can select them, you get a warning, and then if they fail or they keep crashing, then switch them off or uninstall them. But the ones that I've used so far do work in 2020. So when you're creating environments and space and gardens, it's sometimes really useful to add context buildings, whether that's the building at the bottom of the garden or the adjoining commercial properties in a landscape, or you want to build up a little bit of the neighborhood and allow the shadows to kind of be cast from these buildings onto the plots that you're interested in. So the simplest way is to create block geometry. Now, this looks okay. It serves a purpose, but it does look a little unimaginative, and it does look a bit commercial with all of our flat roof buildings. So especially with domestic, it can be useful just to add some character, even if the roof that you put on isn't quite truly representative of the roof in real life. Roofs can be quite complex. So to create the roof that I'm about to could take me 10, 15 minutes. But there's an extension for that, as they say. So I'm going to click the footprint, or in this case, the ceiling of the building. And in the 1001-bit toolset, right at the right-hand end is a little house roof icon. And it pops up a little information card. It's asking me for the roof pitch, so I'm just going to go with the default. And the overhang, I'm going to put at 0.25, oops, 0.25 of a meter, and I'm going to create a roof. Ooh, and it seems to have given me a hole, so I'm just going to try that again. Oops, I've got a group. So pick, run. I'm just going to maybe take off some of those decimal places. 0.25 of a meter, create roof. And it's done it again. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but I'm not going to worry about it. Yeah, but you get the idea. It creates a roof very quickly. And I could just go and try and patch that, but we're going to move on. I keep trying this set from 1001-bit because there are several things in here that are really useful. And one of them is an automatic stair flight generator. And you can see the little icon, hopefully, in the center. And there are 5 icons, in fact. One's a simple set of steps. And then we've got other ones which will create flights between stories. So we get dog legs on our steps. And right at the end is a spiral staircase. So just figuring out these with native tools in SketchUp would take time, and it will do it almost instantly. There is a pro version of 1001-bit, which you have to access from their website. It is paid for, so that I haven't looked, but I'm guessing that would be compatible with 2020 and give you additional functionality within the toolset. But what I'm going to do is pick the single staircase creation tool. And it's asking me for what type of steps. So I've got some options in here, metal-sided, timber-sided. So I'm just going to go with the default, which looks like a cast concrete set of steps. And then I've got some prompts for the dimensions. And as I click over them, the information changes. So it's indicating what the step width is, what the tread, it says thread depth, it should be tread depth. is. So I could go to 0.45. Slab thickness is probably going to be 0.1. Stringer depth, handrail heights, all of those things. I'm going to do 10 risers of 150 millimeters each. And then I click Build Staircase. And it has a little cross that comes up, which is placing a corner. And then I can swing that footprint round to wherever I want. And when I click to place it, there's my steps. And these are SketchUp geometry. It's just been grouped. So as with all things extensions, you can alter them if you wish. And I can go into the group for the handrails, and it's only created the geometry. So what I could do here is pick the geometry for the handrail and then use the Follow Me tool, and I can project or push any particular profile that I want. And obviously I can go into this and color it and do all sorts of things. The next plugin is one of those that are always astonishing to see in use, and it's dynamic. It doesn't instantly create something. It evolves very quickly, but you can see it evolving before your eyes. And there are a couple of plugins like that, but this is the one that I would use. I wouldn't say every project, but it frequently gets used. And it's called Soap Skin Bubble. And this is available free of charge from the extension warehouse. And it creates an inflated piece of geometry based on the boundary of the shape. So here I've got a rather odd kidney bean sort of shape. And if this was a planted island, or you wanted this to be a mounded lawn, then that would actually be a complex piece of geometry to create. And you could try and do it by Follow Me, by going around the outside and patching the middle. But a much quicker way is to let the geometry resolve itself. It works particularly well where the terrain is completely surrounded by hard landscaping. So if you had a series of paths that moved over a slope, and between the path network were pockets of land, then this would be a good way of selecting the perimeter of that land, even though it's a three-dimensional shape, and then it will resolve the geometry in the middle. So the way it works is I pick my surface and the surrounding edge, which is a double click. I hit the skin, and by default, it creates this grid. So I'm going to increase it from, I'm going to say maybe 20. So it's a slightly finer grid. And then I pick the grid that it's created, and I run the bubble tool. Oops, try again. Oh, it does this every time. So let me just unselect all of this. Right. Okay, let's make a 20. Right, I pick, there we go, pick the grid that I've just made, and then I hit the bubble tool. And it's asking me for a pressure. And I'm sure if I read the notes on this application, I would understand what the values of the pressure are. But I found that if I enter a number like -15, and then you can see it inflating that geometry. And if you don't like the results, so maybe that's too steep, I can go -11 perhaps, and it just reduces it, or -9, and maybe that's a little bit better. And the minus number relates to the way it inflates. So this is pushing up. So also it relates to the way my surface is orientated. So I've just noticed that this surface is facing the opposite of the other geometry. So if the white surface was facing up, I wouldn't need to type the minus number. But when you put the pressure in and you put a positive number in and it goes down, then simply retype the number, but with a minus number, and it will inflate in the opposite direction. And you can pick this, and I can soften edges. So it all becomes nice and smooth, and then texture it. So that's Soap Skin Bubble. Here's a set of contours. So another landscaping aid. And I'm going to have to artificially distort this. And in fact, I might come back. I'll use another one, I think. We'll come back to this one. I can see that it's actually already been played around with. So I'll come back to that shortly. And I'm now going to go to a plugin. I don't think we've got time to look at these other two, but if we do, we'll come back to those. There is, so everything so far has been free, but there is a character called Chuck Valley, or Chuck Valey, as I've heard his name recently pronounced. He's an American architect, and he also writes plugins for SketchUp. Now, his plugins are paid for, and you pay for them on an annual basis, and they range between $10 and $25 each, which you might think is expensive, but his plugins are very useful. They are seriously time-saving, and actually, you possibly couldn't do some of the things that his plugins do, even if you were quite a skilled user. There are, I don't know, he must have written 10 or 12. And they're all about putting things into buildings or onto terrain. And the one we're going to look at is called Instant Fence. So you get the idea. It's going to create a fence through a terrain for us. He's written others about Instant Roof. So a little bit more sophisticated than the one at 1001 bits. He's done ones for Instant Wall, site graders, instant terrain. So ways of approaching terrain landscaping. They are somewhat complex. This one is very simple, but some of the others do require you to watch and learn from his videos. But let's have a look at his fence one. I probably use this on most projects. It's easier to put in a fence really quickly than build it and edit it with objects from the 3D warehouse. So all I'm going to do is create a line across this plane. And this could be an existing line or boundary to a property. I'm going to select everything, and I have to make the line a group. And I'm then going to go to his extension, Instant Fence and Railing, and I get a little window. And I'm going to choose from the first window, it's asking me what kind of railing or fence. So I'm going to pick a wooden fence. Could pick metal. There's a little style button, and that gives me a library of images. So in this case, I'm just going to pick something. I don't know. We'll pick this one. So I can close that down. And it's put that style choice into the window. And I could alter the parameters, and I can vary most things in here. If I want double rails or rails that have got certain post sizes, I can distribute the spacing between boards and any cable systems. But I'm going to go right to the bottom and say make fence. And there we are. It's told me it's got some information about it, and you can see that has appeared, and that's the fence style that I chose, a hit and miss. If I wanted it to be taller, then I would go into my parameters and alter the height of the post or the boards or both. I haven't applied a texture to this, but you can choose the materials that you want to appear on each of these items. So we're going to take the same plugin, and instead of just going on the flat, I'm going to see what happens when I place it over a terrain. So I'm going to go into my pencil tool and look at this undulating surface that I've created. And I'm just clicking on points on the surface. And if I select the line and make it into a group, and I'm going to go back into Chuck's extension, wherever we are. And this time I'm going to do a wooden fence again, but I'm going to choose something that's a little bit more random. We'll pick this one. And I'm going to say make fence. So we'll go with the default. And there we go. It took a couple of seconds. And what we've got here is a sort of timber stock fence. And I've got randomness in my posts. They've even got a wobble on them. They deviate from the vertical. They're all placed vertically, and they follow my geometry, and they follow the terrain. So I'm really impressed with these plugins. If you were doing, if this was your garden or landscape and you had to put a fence boundary around it, then I think $26, I think this one cost, £20, £21.50, something like that. That's going to save me, on a big project, that would easily save me a couple of hours. So well worth it. But I'm just going to remind you, you need to practice with these. When you're starting to pay for plugins, it's worth putting in the effort and doing some tests to understand how they work and to make sure that when you use them, then you're more familiar. So you saw that I had forgotten how to do some of the things on the soap skin bubble, and because I don't use it all the time. So don't expect to be able to jump into these little programs and remember how to use them. You have to sort of have understood them to start with, and then be familiar and be prepared to make some mistakes when you come back to them. Okay, I'm going to just go over to another session of SketchUp. And I'm going to go over to this one. And simply because I'm just going to show a few extensions, but these relate to the model that we've been creating over the past two of these webinar series. And whilst I'm here, oops, just rearrange my windows. Okay. Whilst I'm here, I'm going to go into the extension warehouse. I couldn't go in before because I was already logged in from this session of SketchUp. And you can see in the top right-hand corner, it immediately tells me that I'm already logged in. So when you come here, if you don't come here very frequently, it will prompt you to log in. The login is exactly the same as if you're using the 3D warehouse. And the way this site works is you can search for a keyword or an extension that you know exists, or you can browse through the categories. And don't think that if you look in landscape architecture, you're going to find everything that's useful, because sometimes the thing you're looking for might be in architecture or drawing tools, for instance. So it's worth browsing most categories. And I'm just going to pick, I'm going to go into drawing tools. And here it lists all of the plugins that are within the tools. And you can see there's all kinds of labels and styles. It tells you how many people have looked at them, whether they're free or whether you have to pay for them. And there we go, Chuck's Instant Wall. So let's go and have a look at what Chuck's offering. And as with a plugin for your phone, when you're browsing the information, then you would expect to go to a separate page, get some screen grabs, and be able to see some information about it. So here, it's not telling you how much it costs. So it's saying you've got to visit the website. It's giving a whole description. You can click to Chuck's website. He's also on YouTube. But you can see where we had a series of fences, he's offering a plugin that does the same for walls. And because of the way he writes these plugins, then a wall can mean anything. So a wall could actually be a fence, or it could be a bridge, or it could be a viaduct, or it could be a retaining wall, or a stepped wall, or a boardwalk. Because the wall doesn't actually need to be, a particular height. You can set the height. So it could be a path, which is a very, very low and wide wall. So don't just think of walls, think of being able to manipulate that geometry into a whole range of different shapes. So the wall is another really good one. A little warning, his plugins can be awkward to install. You have to download the file and then go and search for the file and then install it. He does give instructions, but it doesn't always work first time. So that's how the warehouse works. You can browse, pick, get some information. It's much more graphic and browser friendly than the Sketchupation website. So I'm just going to come out of that. Right. I'm going to do a few things to this model. And the first thing I'm going to do is geolocate the model. And I think I covered this at the beginning, but I'm just going to quickly show it again because now we've got something that's got some context about it. But it will help because there is a little extension involved. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to File and Geolocation, Add Location. And up pops a window, and I'm simply going to give it a postcode. And I'm just going to pick a garden. That one there will do nicely. Don't know whose that is. And I'm going to select region, and it's prompting me to crop my image down. And then I'm going to say import. And it will peel off that piece of the map that it uses and bring it into SketchUp. And the first thing that does is relocates the default global position of SketchUp, which is the point or the origin where these three axes meet. By default, that's set to Colorado, the SketchUp headquarters. So I just reprogrammed it to West Sussex. I don't really need this aerial picture that it's brought in. They're very low quality, but what you can see is here's my house and the garden. And in my design, the house is at the lower end and the garden's at the top. So I've built my model in the wrong orientation because as you can see, when the image was brought through from the position of the text at the bottom, north is always aligned to the green axes. When we build geometry in SketchUp, we just start creating rectangles and circles, and everything is aligned parallel to the red and the green axes. And then when we drag up, it's always parallel to the blue axes. And that means that we create geometry very quickly. Everything is on axes. But in real life, nothing is in a grid. Everything is slightly in one orientation or another. And as I get towards the end of a project, I could take all my geometry and rotate it round so that the north in SketchUp was the north of my site. But then everything would be off axes, which would be frustrating because when I created geometry, it would still align to the axes, but to put it into the model, I would then have to rotate it. And I think that would drive you mad. So the alternative is to leave the geometry aligned to axes for speedy modeling and to alter the default position of north within this session of SketchUp. And I'm just going to switch off my location. It's maintained the location. I've just switched off the image of the terrain. And what I'm going to do now is go to my tool palettes, and I've got one called Solar North. This is a free download from the SketchUp extension warehouse. I might be wrong, but I think this was actually written by SketchUp. The way this works is there are 3 icons. The final icon is for manually inputting the angle of the site. So you'll probably never use that one. But the first 2 are really useful. The first one indicates the current position of north within SketchUp. And then the second one allows me to place a protractor anywhere. And as I swing it round, you'll notice that the orange arrow line is moving the default north position. So you just simply locate it to where you want north to be. So I'm just going to assume it's down here. And we're done. Don't forget to switch off the orange line before you close. Otherwise, you'll be trying to switch it off and it will appear in all of your drawings. And now I've reprogrammed north. So when I put my shadows in, they're going to be the shadows for this geolocation with the correct north. So they should be very accurate. Now, when you're building up models and you're bringing in textures, and then you might decide, I don't like that texture, then it's easy to build up a hidden library of lots and lots of materials. So if I went into the material library for this model, I've got all of these materials for all of the bits here. And probably some of them are redundant. I brought in an object, it had materials associated with it. I then deleted those materials and the objects have gone. But actually SketchUp retains a reference to those objects and the materials associated to them. And these can be in the background, start to bloat your model, especially if those textures are quite large. But if I brought in furniture or trees or plants and then I've deleted them, they will also stay within the session of SketchUp. And what you need to do occasionally is purge them out. So the first thing I'm going to do before I purge is actually I'm going to make sure that all my materials are a reasonable size. And as I'm bringing those materials in, it's easy to lose track of whether they are appropriate or not. And by that, I mean, if they're very high resolution images and you can't live without them, then whatever the size of that image was when it was taken is what it is when it comes into SketchUp. So if it's a 2 or a 3 megabyte image, then it will come in and take up a considerable amount of space. Now, if you can't live without it, one of the useful things is you can use a plugin that helps you resize the resolution of that image within SketchUp. So you no longer have to adjust the resolution you're taking on site in camera. I always set things now to high resolution, take very high resolution pictures, bring them in and apply them to my geometry, and then I reduce the file size in SketchUp. And the way you do that is download an extension called Material Resizer. And this lists all the materials in SketchUp. And I think it will probably list any that are not actually being used as well, but we'll clear those out in a minute. So I can see here that my images range in size from a 32 by 32 pixel image, which was the dots on the land drain tube that I had. and I've got images that are 512 by 512, all the way through to an image up here, 2 images up here that are 2,000 or 3,000 pixels wide, which means they are enormous. These are really high resolution images. I can't remember where they came from. So what I'm going to do is I can pick them individually, but frequently you're just going to click all of them. And at the bottom, it's saying, what would you like to reduce these materials to? So you can pick a number. Now, you might know nothing about pixel sizes on images, but I can tell you that probably 512 is a useful number. So if the image is about 512 by 512, it's at its optimum. It's quite low resolution, but sharp enough so that it looks good. So I'm going to just see what images I've got. No, I think most of the ones that are actually active are all about the 512. So I'm going to say go, and it'll go away, and it's resized the 2 images that were beyond the limits that I set, and those images are now down to the 512 range. So that's going to reduce my file size quite a bit. And now I'm going to do that purge that I mentioned. So I'm going to go to my extensions and purge. SketchUp has a native purge. I've just found that some of the purges that are applications work a little bit better, but there are several of them. This one is on by a guy called Tig, T-I-G, and he writes quite a lot of these technical little plugins, and I think all of his plugins are free. So in Purge, it's saying unused options. So if there's any layers that I've deleted things from and forgot to get rid of my layers or styles or materials, then I can say OK. And it's told me that it's got rid of 15 styles and 1 material that I wasn't using, but everything else is somehow still active. So that will probably have saved me, again, a little bit of memory. And the final thing whilst I'm here is a mirror command. And SketchUp doesn't have a native mirror command, but you can pick an object. Let's pick this table. And if I want to create a mirror image of it, then I would simply scale it, and I would scale it in the opposite direction by the figure -1. And all you do is just drag it in the direction you want, and it will snap to -1. And that's flipped it or created a mirror image. And if I wanted to make a copy, then I would have made a copy to start with and then scaled by -1 the copy. But what if I want to just mirror about a particular plane? Then a mirror command would be very useful. There are, again, several of them. A really good one is by somebody called Curic, and I think that one's free. But I'm using the one in the Jhs Power Bar, and it's right in the middle. I think this one's by Tig as well. So I'm going to mirror because I want some more of my little stools on the opposite side of my table. So I'm going to double click, and I'm going to pick these objects, and then I'm going to hit the mirror command. And it's asking me for 3 points because 3 points will define the plane, and then it will mirror about that plane. So I'm going to pick that point, and that point. And they were all in line. So I just need to redo that. So if I pick that point, and that point, there we go. So now it's mirrored those elements about the center, approximate center of my table. Oh, that's why. I wasn't paying attention, was I? It mirrored them the wrong way. There we go. So mirroring actually is really powerful because you don't need to necessarily create lots of geometry. So when I'm laying out this table, I could have just modeled, moved and copied, or I could have moved 3 and then mirrored them, or as I've done here, I've made one table, one stool, moved it, and then mirrored those into position. It's quite good for doing planting, because if you lay out plants in one half, then it's really easy to take all of those plants and just mirror them in the opposite direction. Then you could select all of the plants and hit that random rotate and move, just to add variation so that there isn't any symmetry. Okay, I'm going to come out of this and go into my final explanation. So I'm just going to reshare my screen, so bear with me. And here we go. And we're now looking at a survey. I know this is a very good survey. They're not always great, and that usually depends on how they were created and saved in the first place. But what I'm going to do with this survey is I'm going to very quickly try and isolate the geometry of the building and at least get it ready for creating a three-dimensional structure. And under normal circumstances, I would take a deep breath and say, this is probably going to take me till lunchtime. So these can be quite quick, or they can take ages. And I've had projects where I've spent more time cleaning up and working on the building than I did generating the terrain for the landscape. It's just one of those things. And you never know until you get into the survey. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the layering structure that's come in with this. And it's quite short, and everything's got nice, easy to understand labels. I'm going to zoom in and start to select some of these things. Doors. If I look at my entity info, they're on the tag called doors. So if I go and switch those off, I'm going to pick this vegetation thing, and it's telling me it's on vegetation layer, understandably. What else have we got? I've got these little cross survey points, and those are on the level position. So I'm going to take all of the things that have got the level description in them. What else have we got? I've got these little rainwater outlets, I think, and they're under services. So that will save me finding geometry. And I think I can probably work with that. So what I'm going to do is copy just the outline of the house. I know that all of these contours are in a group, and so it didn't select them when I only picked the house. I'd have had to select something a bit wider. So I'm just going to move a copy. Don't be too enthusiastic when you open up your survey and start deleting things and cutting them around and making it a 3D model. Open up your survey in SketchUp and immediately save it into a folder, probably called survey, in your project, and then open up a copy and then work on the copy. It's like having a negative. If things go wrong, you'll have to go back to the surveyor or the architect and very kindly ask for a replacement. So I'm just going to delete these geometry lines. They're on step, but I think it'll probably delete all of the step geometry. So I'm just very quickly going to clean these up. Everything's behaving really nicely, so I'm optimistic. And I've got a few more. I've got one here, and I've got two here, which one hit there. Right. I could use a plugin, and I will just to start with. If I go to Tools, then there's a plugin by somebody called TomTom, and TomTom makes quite astonishing plugins. He makes a whole range of them, and quite a lot of them are to do with things like edges and surfaces and cleaning them up. I'm guessing he got very frustrated at some point in his career and really wanted to simplify his own workload. So there are some very nice tools. Edge Tools allows you to close gaps, as you can see here, or simplify curves. He's done another one called Selection Toys that allows me to only select very particular geometry. So I could only select curves, or only select surfaces, or only select points, or combinations of that. So if I'm looking to delete certain things, then selection filters can be very useful. But we're going to reselect all of this, and I'm going to go back to Edge Tools. I'm just going to say erase stray curves. And it's picked up 16 stray curves. And I'm going to say, great. And what it's done is found odd lines that, there was a couple of little lines sticking out here. And if I tried to make this into a series of faces, then if there were stray curves, then those would have prevented those faces being created. I do have some strange lines here, but I've just noticed, but I'm going to get rid of those very quickly. Right. I'm looking at the footprint of my building, and it seems open at one end for some reason. So either maybe that's a garage or something, or I'm just going to close it at the moment. And that's reassuring, because as I've closed the geometry, all of this has become a closed face. And so it's created a surface that I can then use. So I could go through and start to close off or heal any of these surfaces. But there's a lot of geometry here, even though it seems to be very well done. And much easier way of doing this is if I select everything, and I'm going to go to my extensions and Eneroth Face Creator. And Eneroth is I think she's a Swedish architect who writes lots of these plugins. Some of hers are free, some of them are paid for. Most of them are worth at least looking at. And look at that. It's created everything. This, I'm guessing, is a door that's just a group, so I can delete. So perfect first time. So really thankful to TomTom and Eneroth for making that happen. Now I can simply go to my push-pull, and I would just drag up these walls, and I'm well on the way, to making this into a recognizable building. And this is unusual, because usually this would take, I could be an hour doing, getting up to this stage sometimes. So having these tools can be really useful, time saving, and these ones are free. There we go. I always like to think that most of these plugins make me look good, but they're really doing the work. Okay. I think that is as much as I want to cover. I'm probably over my time, and the plugins that I would want to start showing you would take a little bit too long, and they're quite awkward to use. There's a lot of trial and error, even if you're familiar with them, in creating certain types of geometry, particularly things like organic modeling. There's a couple of guys on YouTube, and they were doing some organic modeling the other day. One was modeling an octopus, and one was modeling a banana, which sounds really simplistic until you actually think of the geometry of something like a banana and try and figure out how to model that. A really good training exercise, in fact, is actually modeling objects that are around you. Just picking up a pen or a pair of scissors, and then trying to figure out how would I model this geometry, and then just keep persevering with it. Little personal projects are probably the ones that are going to push you forward. And there's nothing lost. If you can't make it work, then if you have to abandon it or it all gets really messy, doesn't matter. What you don't want to do is start experimenting in your commercial work, because if that goes wrong, then you're going to be working very late or having to roll back your model. So for today, that's all I'm going to cover. Thank you very much for listening. I hope this series has been useful, giving you a couple of insights into how you might approach or develop your own workflow. I've really enjoyed doing these. If you've got any ideas or questions, then feel free to contact either Elmtech at SketchUp or myself, and we'll do our best to answer any queries that you have. So once again, thank you very much. And hopefully I will see you in a future training.